The Lord be with you.
With your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and God will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little while longer. I give you a new commandment. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Ted Wachowski considered himself an ordinary man. He came to Chicago from Poland after World War II. He worked as an engineer and raised a family. But this young man was also a special witness to one of the great good shepherds of the 20th century. We go back to 1939 to appreciate his story. In September of that year, German tanks rumbled into Poland. The first village attacked by the Nazis was Wachowski's home. He was then 20 years old. He went underground, manned a shortwave radio to gather war news from London, and secretly printed leaflets to let the villages know what was happening. Things gradually became too risky for him, so he hopped on his father's bicycle and headed toward Hungary and then to France, where he hoped to join the Polish army. But he was caught at the border, jailed, and then in May 1940 was sent to the dreaded Auschwitz concentration camp. Auschwitz was not yet a killing field for the Jews, but a place for criminals and enemies and critics of the Nazi regime. Many priests were there. Wachowski lived in a two-story barracks with 800 other prisoners. He was sent out daily to build more barracks. The Nazis treated the prisoners cruelly, saving their special hatred and punishment for Catholic priests. Whenever a prisoner escaped, all the others had to stand in the sun for days with their hands on their heads. After a second escape, 10 prisoners were machine gunned. The third escape occurred around July 1941. The punishment for the third infringement was that 100 soldiers from Wachowski's barracks were forced to stand in rows of 10. 10 of them would die. Wachowski stood in the 8th row. The camp commandant ordered each row, one after another, to step forward. He then began a random selection. 1, 2, 3 were pulled from each group. Wachowski hoped that the 10 would be already singled out before the commandant got to his row. A fourth, a fifth, and a sixth man were picked. The sixth man broke down sobbing. "My wife, my children, who will take care of them?" Suddenly, a prisoner from the 6th row spoke up. He turned to the commander and said, "I will take the place of this man with his wife and children." Everyone looked stunned. Wachowski in particular noticed that there was something serene and remarkable about the volunteer's demeanor. The commandant, however, was not impressed. "You must be one of those vermin priests," he snarled, but he accepted him as one of the 10. All 10. This volunteer and 9 others were locked in a bunker to starve to death. They would not waste bullets on them. That man, that volunteer, was indeed a Catholic priest. But he wasn't just any priest. He was the well-known Franciscan Father Maximilian Kolbe. He was a leader and a gifted man. He published religious magazines and newspapers read by more than 1 million Polish people. He was widely admired, running the largest Catholic religious house in the world. Intensely devoted to the Blessed Virgin Mary, Kolbe supervised 650 Franciscan friars at an evangelization center near Warsaw. Naturally, the Nazis regarded Kolbe with suspicion and mistrust after they invaded Poland. When he resisted pressure to apply for German citizenship, for which he was eligible, he was arrested on February 17, 1941. Back to the incident. When the guards were out of earshot, the prisoners swapped information with one another about the fate of those 10 men in the bunker starving to death. It turned out that Father Kolbe was leading the doomed men each day and throughout the day in prayer and hymns. A piece of bread had been smuggled in for him to use for Mass. After 3 weeks, all the men had died except Father Kolbe, who was near death. The Nazis, impatient to use the bunker to punish others, had a doctor inject poison into Father Kolbe to finish him off quickly. The priest Kolbe had saved, whose place he took was, the man Kolbe had saved, whose place he took, was but a poor anonymous peasant farmer. Kolbe, on the other hand, was a renowned man, only 47 and one of the most well-known and accomplished men in all of Poland. Yet he exchanged his life for the other. He saved not only that peasant, but also Wojciechowski himself, who, inspired by Kolbe's act, endured years of backbreaking labor and abuse in the camp. Finally, in 1945, while being force-marched to Dachau, he escaped and took refuge with a German priest who hid him and fed him until the Allies rolled into Germany. Wojciechowski finally made it to the United States and moved to a Chicago suburb with a large Jewish population where he would raise his family in peace. And Jesus said in this gospel, "They will know you are a disciple by the way you love one another." What just boggles my mind, in a time when Jews were held in contempt by average people, let alone the Nazis, to think that Father Kolbe would lay down his life for a Jewish father, but you see, he was a child of God. That is what being a true disciple is all about. Loving someone to the point it costs you. But are we willing to make that sacrifice? You know, we shake our heads and we at times have nightmares about the horrors we see in our society, as though somehow if we could just pray hard enough, it'll all change. And prayer is so important, don't get me wrong. But you know, when you encounter evil, it takes more than just prayer. These past couple weeks, I've been following a trial going on in Philadelphia of an abortion doctor by the name of Kermit Gosnell. You won't find it on any of the liberal media, NBC, CBS, ABC, none of them would report the details of this trial. What's going on? This Dr. Gosnell is facing 7 counts of first-degree murder for killing babies that were aborted while being full-term. But it was something I heard from one of his assistants the other day that just made me want to throw up and vomit. This young man who was a medical assistant talked about watching over 100 babies born alive from botched abortion. The attorney said, "Well, how do you know they were alive?" He said, "Because their chests were beating up and down. They were breathing, for goodness sake. They were crying in some cases. And they were told to take no prisoners. They took a scalpel and severed the back of their necks in order to decapitate them." I said to my doctor, "Well, couldn't they have given him a leave-go injection? You know, if my dog gets sick, I'm going to have him euthanized." She said, "Oh, no, that costs too much money, and it's hard to find a line of a little infant. So we take a scalpel and behead him. You know, take no prisoners. No evidence is to remain." Can you imagine what's on that man's conscience right now? Can you imagine, if he has a conscience, what he is thinking? You know, at some point in time, he's going to have to deal with the fact that he murdered over 100 babies that could have lived. And then, this week, the President of the United States, who I warned you was radically pro-abortion, made a statement that absolutely made me furious. First of all, as a huge slap to the face to the Catholic Church, he appeared at the convention for Planned Parenthood, a radically pro-abortion organization. And he got up in front of them and said, you know, I have 2 daughters. And if one of my daughters made a mistake, I would help her have an abortion. Yeah, Frankie, you're a mistake. You're a mistake. A product of conception is a mistake? Come on. Call it something. Call it a mistake. It's easy to kill then, isn't it? But you see, that's the President of the United States. He would actually take his daughter to have an abortion. But then on the other hand, there is hope, my brothers and sisters. So many people doing loving acts all around our world, and even in our own country, and even right here in our own parish. But we've got to do something about the hatred. It's too much. It's everywhere and in so many people. I encounter people in my life weekly who are so filled with anger and venom. They're carrying that heavy load. All you want to do is see them let it go and go free. No, Jesus is saying to be a disciple of his, you've got to put others before yourself. You have to love one another. And you know, Pope Francis did it again for me. He talked about another kind of love that we who are part of the church hierarchy are supposed to manifest. It's amazing he's still alive. He hasn't been shot. But he made a statement this week from the Vatican. He was talking about climbers in the Catholic Church. People who are aspiring to high offices in the Vatican and into the diocese and so on and so on. You know what he said about them? He said, you are burglars and thieves. Burglars and thieves. Why? Because you're stealing the glory away from Jesus and trying to put it on yourself. You can't love other people, said Pope Francis, unless you as a priest put your life in service for another. So my brothers and sisters, the message is very simple. We are called to love one another. If we are going to call ourselves Jesus' disciples, as we should, then we have to act like it. But the beautiful part about it, and the Lord planned it that way, if we act like it, not only will he be there for us, but Jesus will become visible to this world that is filled with anger and hatred and pain.